Hello and welcome to the Geneva Macro Labs and Bloomberg Partnerships podcast series, Shaping Tomorrow. I am Marianne from the Geneva Macro Labs Think and Do Tank, and I'm very delighted to lead the conversation today alongside Max Blumberg, the founder of the People Analytics Think and Do Tank, the Bloomberg Partnerships. Max works to bridge the worlds of business performances and analytics. And as a seasoned PhD educated people analytics professional, he offers many years of experience using sophisticated AI and machine learning analytics. We cover a wide range of topics from economic outlooks, risk management to the future of democracy, alluding to the significance of new technologies, the role of regulations and policies, but also sustainable development in general. And today, we take a deeper dive into the future of education beyond artificial intelligence. And it's my great pleasure to welcome a really great scholar, colleague named Michael Fung. He is the executive director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnologico de Monterrey in Mexico, with the mission to generate, transfer, and disseminate knowledge about educational innovation, and to seek also disruptive global solutions to improve the lives of millions of people around the world through higher education and lifelong learning. We're really happy, Michael, that you are with us today. So let us jump directly into the conversation. As I said, today we will be talking about beyond AI and the future of education. Would you like, Michael, to share a little bit about your background, tell us who you are and what kind of models you're working with?
Thanks, Marianne. First off, thank you for inviting me to this podcast. It's a great pleasure and an honor to share perspectives about AI, about the future education. So I have more than 20 years of experience in education and training. And in my most recent job before coming to Tecnologico de Monterrey, I led the Skills Future movement in Singapore. And we built a strong, comprehensive workforce skills development system in Singapore. But there is so much need for education and training around the world, as we have evidence from the COVID pandemic. So this institute I'm leading at the Tech de Monterrey is an opportunity to take some of these experiences and these learning points to the global stage. And Tech has the vision and commitment in charting out the future education and also in the area of lifelong learning. And so through the Institute, I plan to take these educational innovations to the world. I'm excited by the possibilities that it will bring in order to improve lives of millions of people around the world.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Michael, I've been a great fan of your work since we met at an AI conference, probably almost a year ago now, and wanted to ask your perspective, and a lot of the reading I've done about your work is certainly about what you call the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or what is known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the new learning architecture. I don't think one can talk about you without talking about those. So do you want to give us a bit of background? What are those about, and how do they connect to your philosophy?
Yeah, thanks, Max. So Industry 4.0 is really a symptom, if I could use the term, of the kind of technological advancements and impact it has on industries, on day-to-day lives. But we're looking at a broader set of disruptions that's facing the future of work. Clearly, digitalization and the use of technology and AI is becoming more and more important in how businesses serve their customers, in how individuals are able to do their jobs in more automated manner, in more efficient manners. But we're also looking at disruptions due to shifts in demographics. In advanced economies, people are living longer, and so they have to work for a longer period of time in their lives. And so the skills that they need would also change as they get older. The shifts in global supply chains due to pandemic, due to geopolitical movements, that's also disrupting the kinds of skills that's needed by industry. And of course, during the COVID pandemic, we've seen massive and rapid shifts towards areas that is in need of skilled labor and away from areas where demand has gone down. So all these disruptions are really requiring a new paradigm in the way that we look at education and training. The traditional academic system, educational system, is not quite fit for purpose as we look at rapid shifts brought about by technology, brought about by pandemics, and other shifts that I talked about. And in this new paradigm, I think we need to move from an academic focused education system to one that incorporates skills and competencies based pathways. We need to move from a front loaded education system to one that is much more lifelong learning based so that individuals can continue to learn for life. We also have to move from a classroom based paradigm to one that is much more blended with work based learning elements. And in looking at um, um, building technical skills amongst the workforce, we also have to build what I call critical core skills. These are the transversal skills that will bring about greater resilience in the workforce. And we need to move towards a model where it's multi-stakeholder engagement in building up that comprehensive and integrated education and training system throughout life. So as we look specifically at Industry 4.0, we're seeing that technology is affecting multiple industry sectors. Even traditional industries like the legal profession or the accounting profession, they're now grappling with how technology can help to build better services in terms of maybe searching for legal cases or dishing out advice to the customers in terms of in the accounting sector. Particularly in the manufacturing sector, we're seeing the impact of Industry 4.0. And Industry 4.0 started as a term in Germany, but now we're seeing Industry 4.0 strategies in Singapore, in South Korea, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and even here in Mexico, there's a Mexico 4.0 plan that's being worked on. Now, the key question that we are faced with is, do our companies and our workers, do we have the right capabilities and skills as we look at the future of manufacturing, the future of work in the Industry 4.0 era? And this should be a key concern for policymakers, for the industry, and ultimately for our workforce.
Thank you, Michael. I think that's a nice summary of what you are currently doing. For our listeners who don't know you yet, I would like to share that, first of all, you just started your new role as executive director in Mexico at Tech, and congratulations from our side. And obviously, you bring a lot of experience with different national contexts when it comes to shaping their learning landscape strategy. Now, among the many publications that you have been working on the last years, there is one where you wrote a chapter in the book called Powering a Learning Society During an Age of Disruption. Now, I think we all in this conversation agree that it's a time where we see a lot of disruptions, it's disruptive times, not only through the pandemic COVID-19, but also by the technologies that you just referred to. Now, I'm wondering, referring to disruptions, where would you see the social transformation that goes with these technological disruptions? You mentioned already that the educational system is moving from an academic pathway to a pathway that is skill based. But what kind of other transformations did you observe within the last years?
Yeah, so I think I'll point out to some specific observations. In the recent years, even before the COVID pandemic, we've seen a shortage of technological talent. And I'm talking about not just your deep skill talents, but also in terms of general literacy about data capabilities, about using AI. There's just a general lack of knowledge and skills in that area. And so what has then happened is, as job tasks becomes automated due to technology, there is a growing concerns and fears that individual workers are not able to keep up and that their jobs will be displaced. And companies, on the other hand, is looking for skilled talent pool, are not able to find sufficient talent coming out from the educational institutions. We're also observing that in number of traditional disciplines where graduates are able to come out to the workforce, and employers are then willing to provide a certain runway to skill them up in specific areas, we're seeing a growing gap there as well. So the skills that graduates have are not meeting what the employers are looking for. And let's say in a space like digital marketing, a business graduate with a marketing background coming out to the workforce, if they don't have the skills to do search engine optimization, to look at social media channels and use that as part of the digital marketing efforts, they don't quite have the necessary skills that employers are looking for. So this growing gap is a concern because it means that employers are talent starved, and the graduates that are coming out from the education system they are not able to find jobs that they're looking for. In addition to that, I think the general population is also having some concerns about day-to-day living. As we look at electronic payments becoming more common, as we look at transactions moving online, whether it's a government to citizen services or business to customer services, these are also requiring a higher level of digital knowledge. And our older population, the more senior ones, non-digital natives, are also fearful and struggling as they look at using technology in their day-to-day lives. So I see these various factors at play as we look at the future of skills and future of technology and AI in day-to-day lives as well as industry development.
So I was curious, Michael, in Singapore, and I'm going to contrast it with Mexico in a sec, but what is a day in the life of Michael Fung? What does it look like? What do you actually do to implement all these great initiatives that you're speaking about?
It's a great question, Max. If I reflect on my journey in the Singapore context, the efforts towards building an integrated education and training system was very much a government-led effort. And although it's multi-stakeholder in nature, the government plays a very strong role in charting out where the economic growth sectors, in charting out in forecasting the labor market needs, and that then translates into the reskilling and upskilling needs for the education and training system. And through generous investments in workforce skilling, we're able to build a very comprehensive and integrated system in the Singapore context. As I think about the Mexican context, clearly the government is not as involved as compared with Singapore, but that then opens up a space for private sector-led innovation. And we've seen a lot of that happening in the Mexican context. And I'll point to the example of Tec de Monterrey. Tec de Monterrey, on their own ambition and vision, had embarked on a ambitious transformation journey starting from about 10 years ago to move towards a competency-based higher education system and one that is challenge-based. So by engaging industry with more than 700 industry partners now, we're able to bring real industry problems into the classrooms for our students to work on those problems. So as students work through these problems, they gain valuable work skills. And so our graduates are highly sought after, they're well regarded by the industry that then would employ them when they graduate. So this is an example of a privately led innovation by Tec de Monterrey, which is one of the largest private universities in this part of the world.
Obviously, lifelong learning is nothing new. I mean, we have been talking about this for 20 years. The OECD, I remember in the 90s, mid 90s, was pushing a lot in Europe for lifelong learning. But it seems what has shifted are our way to respond to the disruptions that we are seeing, right? The way we kind of try to involve different stakeholders. And you just have mentioned the private and the public sector. To give you one example, in Austria, I'm originally Austrian, I was just checking lately that there are between 1,500 and 2,500 establishments who offer programs to continue lifelong to make it possible that people can continue lifelong learning. And in that regard, we have lots of nonprofits that are now coming to the scene, and also obviously commercial providers. Which are the stakeholders that you would elaborate on if you would ask you, okay, besides the general public private collaboration, what kind of actors are coming to the landscape?
Yeah. Marianne, I'll just respond to a point that you raised, right? And it's a good point. Lifelong learning as a concept has been around for some time. But I think the big difference is it's become a must have, in my view. Whereas in the past, we think about lifelong learning as a nice to have. If you have the time, the ability, and the means, go ahead, let's do lifelong learning. But as we think about the disruptions that we're talking about and the impact it has on society, on workers, on individuals, on companies, I would argue that lifelong learning is becoming a must have. And so I think that's the step jump that we're looking at in terms of this area of lifelong learning. What I think is really challenging to us is we need almost universal access to lifelong learning. Just like how we think about mandatory education in many countries, it's an area of heavy public investment, and I would argue that increasingly we need heavy investments into lifelong learning systems as well, whether it's a combination of public and private funding. And to your question, that multi-stakeholder approach, I think, needs to be comprehensive as well. Because if we're trying to build a system for life, it is not something that an individual stakeholder group could champion on their own. And as I reflect about the Singapore experience, we involved, clearly the government's involved, we involve companies, both large and small companies. Large companies bringing in their expertise in particular areas, and small companies being involved in encouraging them to train their employees. We also involve the public educational institutions. So all the universities, polytechnics are involved in continuing education training, as we call it. We involve industry associations. They play an important role. The unions as well. And of course, private training organizations who have always been active in that space. So it becomes a multi-agency, multi-ministry effort, along with all the other key stakeholders within our community and within our economy.
And Michael, I take your point well that it's lifelong learning is almost necessary for survival, or is necessary for survival. What about people whose natural bent, for want of a better word, in life is not towards natural learning? A lot of people who might go into manual jobs because they enjoy this sort of thing, or because they do not have a desire or ability to learn. What is the future for people in this position?
So, Max, I think what you are referring to is what I'll call a motivational confidence and a mindset issue. I believe that at the heart of each and every individual, if we see ourselves as learners, we would always find ways to learn new things, right? And to Marianne's earlier point, I've gone through many different learning experiences in my life because I do see myself as a learner, and I put myself in new situations to learn new things. And now I'm trying to learn the Spanish language here in Mexico. But there are indeed segments of our population that's in that archetype that Max that you have described, and that's a concern because if individuals see themselves doing that same job throughout their entire lives, and they don't feel like they can learn and pick up new skills or move on to new jobs, then when automation comes or when the business models get disrupted, they will be out of jobs and they will find themselves falling on hard times. Now, I believe that even for that segment of our workforce, there are ways to shift the mindset. We need to give them small challenges to start with, small learning challenges, and let them go through the experience of learning, succeeding at learning, and finding that they can see themselves as lifelong learners and be able to then have the confidence to continue learning for life. Here, I'll bring an example in from the Singapore context. we started a uh, initiative we call it Skills Future Credit, which is like an individual learning account. And we started that in 2015. And the amount of money that we put into Skills Future Credit was relatively small. It was 500 Singapore dollars for citizens above 25 years of age. It was not meant to, help an individual deep skill in AI or, one of these heavy duty areas. It's just $500. And it was an interesting social experiment because now when you have money in your account, every individual starts asking themselves, what do I want to learn? What do I want to use the money for? And so we enable that learning account credit to be used for a wide range of learning courses, including things like baking, flower arrangement, but also practical skills like real estate courses, or security, or in terms of education training courses and so on. But even for those individuals who used it for courses like baking and so on, what actually happened was they started seeing themselves as learners, and that then prompted them on to go on to other learning episodes in their lives. So I think this mindset shift is very powerful, but we need to provide opportunities for the mass population to be able to engage in such learning and to start seeing themselves as lifelong learners.
Mhm. That's very powerful. And I would like to draw that back to Max. He is actually the psychologist among us in this conversation today, working in people analytics. Max, how would you see then this endeavor to really address the motivation of your of populations to continue learning and to see the beauty of innovating in that sense?
I think that's an excellent question, Marianne, and I wish that there was a simple answer because in psychology there isn't. I would say the quick answer to that is that we don't yet know what interventions would motivate people because there's been so little research in this area. And so I'm strongly in favor of people like Michael. In addition to the great work of commissioning these courses, also commissioning research to find out what creates take up. If you take people going into, for example, coaching, or into therapy as an example, one thing we've learned is that you cannot advertise therapy or coaching to encourage people to come to you. They have to come when they want to and when they're ready. I think, as they say, when you are ready, the master will come, or probably the madam or the mistress will come. But it's when you're ready. And so I think what I hear you saying is that when the need becomes high enough, perhaps, and people really find that jobs are scarce, maybe that is when those extra dollars in the account will really start bringing people forward. So I think it's a combination, to answer your question, Mariana. It's going to be great research into what interventions really bring people forward, and then also the need for when you go to the bank and there's no money in your bank account and somebody is saying if you train, you'll be able to get a job. Do you also have a take on that?
One phrase that comes to my mind is a very simple one, which is measure what you treasure. And it seems to me that we can apply this phrase in many different contexts. And in our context, our conversation, I would say that I absolutely would agree that in order to make here a sound conclusion of how effective such measures would be, we would need additional data. But it seems to me at the same time that isn't it at the center of our human quest of having a purposeful life that you would move onwards and upwards. I think that is an intrinsic motivation that it's fairly sure to assume that this applies to our way of doing life. And I'm just thinking of one example, and that is Germany. In Germany, we have had a reform which is called Hartz IV, which basically is a placement program that would take care of unemployed people who would then be motivated, encouraged to look for a job. And basically, it's based on statistics, it's based on quantitative indicators. And it seems that the overall goal is much more on finding a job that the person can deliver, but it's not necessarily about taking their motivation and intrinsic desire to learn and to move forward into account. So what we have is in several cases a mismatch of a person willingness to do a certain job and the reality. So as a sociologist, I'm always wondering how can we make sure that we set the social fabric in the right way so that we have thriving communities. And it seems to me that this is an extremely difficult task. So I believe that we need to work across disciplines and disciplines. Sorry, and that means that when we are drafting policies at the national level, we need to have psychologists as well at the table who would then consult and say, well, the data that we have so far suggests. And if we don't have the data, we make sure that when we are doing this kind of social experiments, we have the data for the next round at our hands.
Can I ask you a question based on that, Michael? Is
Yes.
what Marianne described there was in psychology, we call it an approach avoidance. You either approach the new learning willingly or you approach it to avoid poverty. From your experience in implementing many programs, now globally, is it more about approach because they want it or avoidance because they are trying to escape from a bad-looking future?
That's a excellent perspective and angle to look at this issue. But I just want to really respond to the comments that Max and Marianne you have mentioned. I think it's really important to look at the motivation of individuals. What we have really learned is that you could build the supply, but if the demand is not there, the system's not going to work. So as I've described, we've built a very comprehensive system in Singapore, but we very quickly realized we needed to work on the demand side, the mindsets, the motivations. And Max, there are really two sources of motivations, right? If I use the stick and the carrot to paraphrase the approach versus the avoidant constructs that you mentioned, I think the pandemic and all these talk about robots taking away human jobs is coming from that stick approach, right? There's a burning platform, something terrible is going to happen, you better learn. It is a strong motivator. From a psychological perspective, it's a strong motivator, but I don't think that's sufficient because once you take the stimulus away, once people start getting comfortable again, they stop learning, right? So I think it's much more powerful if we can instill or nurture a mindset amongst our population, amongst our workforce, that they are learners. They see themselves as learners and they continue to want to learn for life. Now, if we do get to that point, I would say a lot of the problems that we see today in the labor market would somewhat disappear because individuals will constantly be thinking, what are the new skills that I need? Or I aspire to this job, this new job, what skills do I pick up? And they'll continue to learn for life. And that would truly create that kind of resilience in the labor market and mobility in the labor market that we long to see. So I really hope that we can shift from the burning platform to one that's much more self-driven, an internal view of oneself as a lifelong learner.
I hope that happens because I see that there are haves who already have the education, and there are have-nots who don't. And I suspect that when the 3 or 4 of us who look at the world, we see it through the eyes of people who are really keen to get education. So we would assume and project our requirement for education and desire onto other people. I hope that that's true, and that it doesn't increase the divide with those who already have taking more and more education, while those who don't
Yeah, I think role models are very important because part of that mindset building has to come from observation, right? If I observe that somebody that's similar to me, right, that person that Max talked about, right, that worker that's been the same task day in day out, if his or her buddy starts going for some kind of learning episode and is able to move up in the job,
Uh-huh.
then they could see that, oh, if my buddy could do it, I could possibly do it too. And so when I talked about nurturing the awareness and the mindset shift, it's also about hitting the softer aspects of change management, if you would. In a corporate term, it's change management. So we would amplify examples of individuals that have embarked on learning episodes and was able to move up in the career. And we do that across a range of job roles, not just your doctors and teachers, but also your craftsmen, a shoemaker, a bus captain. So we celebrate these successes so that the message gets out there that no matter what is your starting point, what kind of job you have, you can learn and you can move up in life. And I think
Mhm.
that's important in terms of building that demand awareness. But I'll just add that the demand side is not just individuals; it's also companies. Many times, when I speak with bosses of small medium enterprises, they're very focused on short-term profitability, as you could understand. But the view about employee development is also fairly limited because of a fear that if I were to support my employees to upskill themselves, they will leave and go join a competitor, and then I have wasted all the investment. But I think that's a short-term view because unless they're willing to invest in upskilling the employee, they're not going to be a choice employer. So the talented employees will leave anyway, and the industry as a whole would just be leveling down rather than leveling up in terms of skills. And I think in that aspect, we look to the the German model or the Swiss model, where the industry associations are very much involved in promoting skills development across the entire industry. And I wonder if you have some perspectives on that, Eckhart, on how that model has worked successfully in Germany.
Indeed, thank you, Michael. That's an excellent suggestion to address that question to Eckhard, who has joined our conversation today from the backstage. Let me properly introduce Eckhard to our listeners first. So, Eckhard Ernst is the president of our Geneva Macro Labs Think and Do Tank, and he is also a chief economist at the International Labour Organization. Eckhard, over to you now.
Yeah, I mean, this is an absolutely essential feature of the German model, and especially when it comes to this dual vocational training system. And as you said, I mean, the question of poaching and talented people leaving your enterprise to work for the competitor is obviously in everybody's mindset as well. The thing is, so there's one institutional element in Germany that I don't know to what extent it exists in Switzerland as well, but it's really essential. It's compulsory to be part of a industrial association if your company, and so you're automatically part of that network, and because you pay for it, you might as well kind of participate in this in that network, and and so being part of that network means that you also exchange regularly with your peers. You talk about challenges in terms of new technologies, how to implement them, new markets, how to address them, etc. And at the same time, the industry association typically gives you a lot of support. For instance, if you plan to export, I mean, German chambers of commerce have a worldwide network of foreign subsidiaries there where you can learn how to export to a particular market. So it's actually there's a value to be part of that network, and it helps to kind of limit these kind of intercompany competition for talent, because you actually know by being part of that network that your worker has exactly the same type of competence and skill profile as the worker next door, because they went through the same program. That is true at the beginning of the career. It's not necessarily true later on, and that creates often this kind of lock-in effect in German companies where people stay often too long in their companies, simply because they're basically trained on this particular job that is only or the particular task that's only relevant for their company, and can't really be used anywhere else. So it does create a problem in terms of industrial change overall, and you see that in Germany. Germany has barely changed its comparative advantages over the last 60, 70 years. Which is a problem, obviously. It creates a lot of cluster risk around certain industries. But it obviously does provide strong stability for this type of educational model. And now, how to solve that problem in terms of flexibility, I don't have an answer to that. I don't think that anybody really has. It really depends a bit, on where you want to rely your comparative advantages, and as I used to call it, institutional comparative advantages, in the sense that each country has its basically its institutional framework that shapes somehow where a different industry can strive, and in a sense, the educational system to a certain extent needs to take this into account in designing and delivering education and skill and training.
I mean, most people tend to get the education of their parents, and to Michael's point earlier, of their peers. So peer, you use the example of peer pressure that I see. A friend of mine has gone for this learning. I would never have considered myself to be a learner, but if she is doing it, I can do it. But you raised another really interesting point, and you made a distinction between large companies and small companies, Michael. What is the difference in uptake? Because we hear that there are a lot more startups in the world. I don't know, Eckhard, whether there's data to support that, or whether it's a Western or a particular country thing. But from my experience with small companies, and having been a small company owner myself, I can assure you that there's very little time for training and development. You are permanently fighting fires. You are just chasing, let alone profit. You're just chasing breaking even. So do you have a difference in philosophy towards large organizations and small organizations?
Well, so Max, it's true. I mean, not to take anything away from small, medium enterprises, there are lots of pressures on these businesses. If I contrast our experience working in large companies with smaller ones, large companies would tend to have dedicated human resource functions. And in these human resource functions, again, typically there'll be a learning and development function. And so there is the ability by these companies to look at take a longer term view of their workforce, and look at how to systematically provide learning opportunities for the workforce. And so in that sense, large companies have that advantage. Now, in particular, some multinational companies have very well developed global learning systems. And so, in our view, they are quite well prepared in terms of looking at disruptions going forward. In contrast, for many small, medium enterprises, the CFO is also the CHRO, is also the COO. So there isn't really that ability and that dedicated time, space, and resource to look at this, the area of employee development. But I must say that it's been encouraging, because with the small medium enterprises that we have managed to engage with in the skills future movement, the ones that are progressive in terms of mindset, they've found ways to engage with the various support programs for their employees to be upskilled. And some of them have gone on to be industry champions, if you would, spokespeople for their industry, to tell everyone else that you can do it too. And again, it's that comparison with a close reference point, that it's helping other small medium enterprises to get the message that, well, we can do it too. If this company can do it, we can do it too. But what it means is we need to really reduce the friction and the opportunity cost for these small medium enterprises to get their employees to be upskilled and reskilled. And that can be done through a combination of interventions by the government, possibly by the industry associations. Back in the Singapore context, we've worked with some larger industry champions we call them queen bees. They've actually invested time and some of the resources with matching from the government to uplift the skills for the industry sector as a whole. And many of these Queen Bee programs are targeted at helping the small medium enterprises find an easy way to come on board some of these upskilling and capability development programs. So we need a variety of interventions and approaches, and it's still a challenge. It's still an ongoing piece of work, but there's some very encouraging initial results.
You've just given me an inspiration. Sorry, my last point, and then I'll let the others go. But you've just given me such an inspiration for small organizations. My belief now, after hearing that, is that what we need perhaps is an outsourced learning and development function for small organizations. And I think the government could go a long way, or governments could go a long way into providing what an L&D would provide within a corporate, providing for many, so assessing people's skills, interests, etc., making recommendations on what your next development path is, etc. The stuff that you automatically get in the corporate could be made available to small, and then I think the take-up would be much higher. So that's a very inspirational idea there.
That's right. So I think for small medium enterprises, the solutions have to be less complicated, because if it's too complicated, it takes too much time, too much investment of effort to understand it and come on board. So it has to be almost turnkey, low effort, and low cost, and easy to adopt, so that they can start seeing some quick successes and continue to invest not just money, but in terms of their commitment to these solutions. And by pooling resources together, we think about it as L&D as a service, right? If we can pool resources together, then SMEs will be able to engage without having to invest heavily, just on their own, and that might help to crack the puzzle, solve the puzzle for the small medium enterprises.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
That reminds me a little bit of the discussion that we could observe the last years around the global talent competitiveness report that kind of compares cities' capability to provide learning landscape. And as if I recall it correctly, Singapore was really at the top of the rankings. Also, Geneva and Zurich and some Swiss cities. So it seems that there is not an easy answer to that question of how can we make sure that the learning experience is shared by all the different sectors. But in the contrary, it seems that it's very dependent on the sector that we are looking at. And at the same time, it looks like that we need to make sure we are not missing out on very specific groups. And I'm just thinking about, marginalized groups that have been not at the top of our learning agenda for many years. So that kind of brings us to one element that we agreed we would be talking today about, and that's AI. I remember, Michael, that you were sharing in some of our conversations we had before that you have an example how AI could help to reach marginalized groups. Am I correct?
That's right, and Marianne is a great point. As we think about, as we talk about topics of AI and education and training, we must not forget that there are segments in our society that is not even able to access some of the very basic forms of education. Singapore is blessed because we have a highly educated, highly literate population. But even then, there are segments that are low skill, low wage, low literacy. And so specific programs, interventions have been put in place to help those segments to continue to learn in their lives. But in terms of using AI, I think AI and technology gives us new ways of reaching out to communities at a scale that was not possible before. Uh, but that does still require support and intervention, because many of these marginalized communities do not even have access to the internet or even basic infrastructure. And that's one of the key areas that I think we need to be concerned about as we think about the future of work and future education. Well, the specific example I would share is an initiative here at the Institute for the Future Education. We run an annual competition, we call it T Prize, to solve educational problems in Latin America, and in particular for marginalized communities. So last year we handed out a number of awards, and one of the winners was from Chile, and the solution was called MyDay. It is an app that is, the team developed an app for rural schools. Because of the pandemic, there were, UNESCO had said something like 1.5 billion children and young people out of school. So how do we keep these populations in these communities? How do we keep them on the educational track? And so this team from Chile developed an app for rural schools, and using technology and AI, they developed a lightweight, a low-cost solution where learners and students could have content on their mobile phones and learn it in an asynchronous manner, in an offline manner, without the need for internet access. And this app has the potential of reaching out to thousands, if not millions, of students in these rural communities in Chile. So it's examples like that innovation that we can look at using technology to extend education to marginalized communities, not just in Chile but in other parts of Latin America and around the globe.
So the mechanism that we are seeing here is that through a competition, such innovation was spotlighted and could now become a game changer in that space.
Absolutely, yes.
So if I just kind of expand on that point, I mean, essentially what you're saying that is AI or new technologies are really infrastructure tools, and we should actually think about them as complementary, not to individual jobs, but rather to an entire labor market function or institutions that are surrounding labor markets. For instance, by kind of helping public employment services in delivering on their services, as you said, reaching out to new communities, or by education institutions, kind of providing better career orientation, etc. So that's a whole new perspective on AI, I think, and I think it's an important point to stress.
Yes. So I think that you're right, Eckhart, that many times when we think about AI, we're thinking about having the skills within our companies. But AI can be used very effectively for understanding complex economic and social context, right, and the situations. And I'll take, for example, during the COVID pandemic, we're seeing numbers of workers displaced from particular industry sectors, like hospitality, air transport, and so on. But yet at the same time, there were large increases in the jobs in areas like healthcare, even in construction, because of the need to have safe management practices and so on. So then the question becomes, how do you help all these displaced workers find jobs that they can quite readily go into? And at what kind of numbers and scale? And also, what are the top up skills they might need to be able to move on to these jobs? And so, using big data, using AI techniques, we were able to analyze the skills profile of workers who were being displaced, match it against the different types of jobs available for a percentage of skills match, and very specifically identify which of the skills that are missing, so that we can then advise these groups of displaced workers go for these short bootcamp training so that you can reskill yourself for a job that's in demand, right? And so that's an example of an effective use of data and AI to help policy making, to help interventions of such a nature. But at a broader scale, we could use AI to better understand the skills landscape in an economy. Where are areas of oversupply? Where are areas of undersupply? And be able to adjust our interventions and our training systems to respond to that.
And what about the use of AI for personalized learning, Michael? Rather than one size fits all, individual learning paths depending on my personality and my learning preference, etc. Is there any future for that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the area of learning analytics is still in its infancy. There's so much more we can do because we know that all of us are different. We have different backgrounds, we have different learning modalities, learning preferences. And if every learning episode can be personalized and tailored to an individual's strengths and weaknesses, that will be much more effective. So, one of the areas of research under the Institute for Future Education is indeed on personalized learning using technology and AI, and to be able to design pedagogical methods that will make full use of their understanding in delivering effective learning outcomes.
Wonderful.
I just heard the word um, that you just said, learning episode, and I really like that term because kind of it kind of suggests that we don't have like this massive learning journey and it has no end, but it's episode is suggesting that there are different, there's a different focus each time that we could work on, rather than being overwhelmed with the need to adapt to an ever changing world. um, I read just some months ago that um, a couple of years ago, the World Economic Forum suggested that over 50% of IT practitioners will basically need to reskill themselves in 2022. So now we are in 2022, and a lot has changed the last years. And it seems to me that upskilling also applies to the very field of AI specialists who have been trained in that field, but as well for them it implies that they need to keep on learning and reflecting and building on research to counter bias, to counter risk, and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's if you're an IT professional, it's a scary world. I've heard stories where somebody going into an IT project, to deliver the project in say 6 to 9 months. If that individual doesn't keep up to date with the latest that's going on, right after that project, they don't have the right skills for the next project. That's scary, right? 6 to 9 months. That's the kind of cycle I'm hearing. But yes, so IT professionals need to continue learning because that industry is moving so quickly. The skills, the programming language, and the nature of the projects and the systems is evolving so quickly. But I use the word episodes because I do think that as we think about lifelong learning, it's not about big chunks. It's going to be about bite-sized, small chunks as we go. Now, this is equivalent to watching a Netflix episode. If you're watching a drama series, you have two options: watch it all at one go, and then don't watch a Netflix, drama ever again, or watch it in little bite-sized chunks. And I think learning has to
Great
be like,
analogy.
yeah, bite-sized chunks, and we continue to reap the benefits and the satisfaction of learning as we go.
A great analogy. I really like that. I mean, what does scare me a little bit, since Mariana raises it, is this AI and the need to keep up in IT, which you emphasized there as well. Is that I'm finding in my own field, which revolves a lot around analytics, is that most of the jobs now you have to have a master's or a PhD, or you are not even on the field to get that kind of work. Being a graduate in computer science now is just not enough because the work is so technically difficult. Are there going to be reserved jobs in the future, Michael? How, do you have a view on that, perhaps?
So as we think about tech talent, I would say that there are sort of three levels. At the top end is what I call the deep skill level, the experts, deep tech. And so here's where you are looking for individuals with maybe masters or even PhDs in particular areas. So if we're looking for a data scientist, for example, that is well versed in statistical methods, different types of regression models, analytics, and so on, you might need somebody at that level. Then there is that sort of middle level, which is also technically heavy, but you don't really require that level of analytical training. And so this could be your data engineers, it could be your programmers, and so on. What's really important for this group of individuals, I believe, is the projects that they've worked on in the past. because that is evidence to the employers that they have the right skills, not just their degree qualifications, that they actually have worked on projects similar to what the employers are looking for. And here, the IT industry is being quite innovative. There are different types of certification programs, including micro credentials, digital badges, to give some kind of recognition to individuals with the necessary skills, for the badging. Um, I'm also reminded of a model, Eco 42, that model came from France, but we're also implementing some of those experimentation in Singapore, where the entire education journey is all challenge based. There are no lectures, there are no teachers, there are no classrooms, but it's just challenge after challenge. There's peer feedback, and you solve all those challenges and prove that you're able to handle those projects, and you learn
Mhm.
along the way. And then at the broad level, and I would argue this is for the entire workforce, the awareness and basic understanding of what data can do, what AI can do, I think that's also very important. So that we're able to leverage on tools that have been built by the IT professionals and be able to do our work more effectively. So that broad-based awareness and understanding is also important in terms of skills.
Yeah, I
Echo.
wanted to go back to one point that you raised, which I find extremely fascinating. Is this fact that your skills, especially in the IT profession, seem to kind of have an extremely shorter and shorter half lifetime. I mean, even 6 to 9 months already, you run the risk of having obsolete skills. And I mean, what you're describing in a sense is the impression that a lot of people get, that somehow we have an accelerating technological progress, right? Like, I mean, they take the depreciation rate at which skills become obsolete, or take the size of AI models that become exponentially larger, etc. But at the same time, there is, if when you look at it from a different angle, there is a sense that somehow we are not making any progress scientifically. There is actually a huge concern in science right now that we are having a proliferation of fields or disciplines, but we are actually making less and less progress. I mean, Marianne's husband is physicist, and he knows what I'm talking about. And from an economic point of view as well, it's like we don't make any progress in terms of raising our living standards, at least in advanced economies anymore. And so the question is, so how do we square that kind of apparent sense of accelerating change, and at the same time the sense that the broader mass of people really doesn't benefit from it? And the question obviously then becomes, is there some kind of problem in terms of that this whole change that we see is kind of increasingly narrow and narrow on a small number of either disciplines or people, and so it doesn't really diffuse as much as it used to in the past. And the question obviously to you in this respect is, what is it that educational institutions can or should do in order to address that problem, if that is actually the right answer to that question?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've heard that discourse in different platforms, but I'm not sure if I totally agree with it. This notion that AI is not benefiting the masses is something that I don't fully agree with. It's one of those things that I think when we benefit from it, we take it for granted. And I'll take a few different, simple examples. Many of us use Google Maps to find our way around now. That's a great use of data and AI to help you figure out where to go from point A to point B. I remember those street directories and maps as you travel. You have to stop at the gas station to ask for directions. Those days are gone. But we don't think about that. Those conveniences, we don't think about that. Now, when we go on a shopping app and we buy something really quickly and easily and have it delivered, from Amazon or some other place, we don't think about that. So I think we benefit a lot from day to day living with data and with technology and with AI, but maybe we are taking it for granted. But I think the other, really the bigger issue here is that myth and misconception about AI and technology. AI is not, I mean, AI is based on some very fundamental and basic computer science methods, and it's not a fearful new development that is going to come and destroy our world. But because of the misunderstanding and lack of understanding of AI, there's a lot of myths around AI and what could happen. True, technology and AI could be used for non-productive and perhaps even negative purposes. But the same thing can be said about many inventions, in our human history. So I think coming back to the question about what should we do in the education system, we should provide more awareness and understanding of technology and AI throughout the formal education system and also through the lifelong learning systems. The more we understand something, the better we are able to use it, manage it, and be comfortable with it. So concepts around computational thinking, working with data, and some elements of understanding AI systems, I think that should be a common feature across all our academic programs, so the next generation that comes out from our school systems would be comfortable with technology, have an understanding of how to use it, and for the current workforce and the current populations that we have, we need to find ways to better communicate what AI does, what it cannot do, and really get the broader understanding and reduce the level of fear due to a lack of understanding of AI.
So what you're
If you are,
saying,
sorry, Marianne.
I just wanted to summarize for our listeners. So what you're saying, Michael, is that we should introduce AI at a younger age to our populations. We need to encourage research in that field. And the third point, to me, what I'm hearing, reading between the lines, is that we need to look out for these transferable skills, right? So to understand what are the mechanisms behind these learning episodes that could be applied then for for new challenges that are arising. And I really love that challenge based approach, because I feel that this is really speaking to the need of the younger generations. And just to give you an example, we at the Tecnologico Labs, we work in the innovation space, and we can see that, for instance, in the last 2 years, we have a huge rise of hackathons, where basically you have a challenge, you have a problem, and then you try to get a diverse group of people together to think about that problem, to agree on common pain points, and then to look out for solutions. And I
Mhm.
believe that this first exercise to agree actually what are these pain points that we all want to work on is a very important step that we need to take before we look into then redefining the challenge and then looking for the solutions. And I really love the fact that you now spend quite some time explaining how this journey to become AI literate is
Mhm.
something, or the AI literacy is something that should be at all the ministries' agendas. As I'm hearing that you are
Yes.
advocating for not only having the Ministry of Education to be leading that transformation, but also having the Ministry for Innovation, the Ministry of Work, etc., included
Mhm.
for the task.
Yes, I think so. I think as we think about what I'll call digital fluency. As we think about digital fluency becoming more and more important across multiple industry sectors and also in day-to-day lives, then we need to mobilize the governments across multiple sectors to be promoting digital fluency in their respective sectors. And Marianne, you talked about broader set of horizontal skills, and I would think that digital fluency has to be one of those horizontal skills. If we look back maybe like 10, 15 years, if you can start a computer, use Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, you considered IT literate, and that would be the basic maybe job requirements. Today, that's like a given. They're asking if you have worked with data systems, are you familiar with maybe statistical methods. That bar for digital fluency has gone up, and I think it will continue to go up given the way that technology is advancing. So we need that set of broader skills, or for the broader population, that digital fluency, and
Okay,
continue.
so what would then what would then be the baseline for the skills for our listeners to understand? You just said, and I absolutely agree, mastering Word and PowerPoint is a given. But what is the baseline?
I think what we're seeing today, more and more employers are requiring employees to have some form of ability to work with data systems, some form of ability to, let's say, use social media channels, and some form of ability to, be able to support electronic transactions. That's, I think, what we're seeing across a broad segment of the industry. Well, what's the next step, next level? Who knows? But one thing for sure is that it will continue to go up because that's what technology is driving those changes and transformations. And that goes back to sort of the earlier point about making sure that there's ongoing learning episodes for life because we all need to keep upskilling ourselves in those areas. But I think also beyond digital fluency are other relevant broader skills. If I call it transversal skills or 21st century skills, as some people call it. And that's very important too, because as we think about embracing change and continue to change throughout life, we must have some of these broader important skills so that we're able to manage and handle those changes. There are sort of three domains that we defined in the Singapore context. We call them critical core skills. In the domains of being able to be a critical thinker, in terms of interacting with other people, collaborating, teamwork, and so on, and staying relevant, embracing innovation, embracing change, being digitally literate, and those are all critical core skills that we see that's needed by our workforce. And other think tanks like World Economic Forum, McKinsey, they have their versions of mapping a set of broader competencies, but they all largely map to these same constructs. And we're hearing from employers these are the kinds of qualities they're looking for from their employees that they bring on board. So beyond the technical skills that we've been talking about, AI and technology and other skills, we need to also emphasize some of these broad skills to build the adaptability and the resilience of our workforce.
Max, I see you nodding.
I'm just so agreeing. For me, probably the critical thinking trumps all. Because, if you've got critical thinking, you'll have the ability to digest what you are explaining and showing us here, Michael. So I think that's a strong point. I just wanted to come back to Eckhardt's very difficult question. Good question, but very difficult, where, you spoke about science and economics are approaching limits. And I wasn't particularly aware of that. But if that is true, what you're saying is that knowledge is, yes, I think it would be knowledge in given fields is reaching a kind of an asymptote. And the question is, why are we reaching an asymptote? You could put forward hypotheses, but one of them, I know you love complexity theory. It could be that the human intellect at some point, perhaps, and this is a hypothesis, perhaps there are fewer and fewer people who are able to handle the really difficult questions of the point where economics is today or where physics is today. And perhaps there's a smaller and smaller population. Now, if your hypothesis is that Michael's type of education could raise the intellect to move it forward, that would be very interesting. But I'd love to see some research to show what are causing the limitations we're seeing in the sciences and the social sciences today.
I mean, if I may add just to that question, so what those people who put forward this hypothesis argue is that it's not so much some inherent cognitive limitations that we might have, but rather the way the incentive structure is constructed, especially in the academic world, where you basically are incentivized to publish more and more papers, even if they are only marginal contributing to the field, whereas the truly innovative type of blue sky thinking is not really encouraged. And somebody was making the joke that somebody like Euler or these mathematicians in the 18th century, they would never have gotten anywhere today in today's world because they they published maybe 1 or 2 books in their entire lives. Yeah? And whereas today you have to publish hundreds of articles in your academic career. And so I think that the question for me, and this is maybe again something where I would like to hear Michael on, is that beyond the individual competencies and skills, it's also a question, and that's the point again what Marianne raised before about the social fabric, the way we interact with each other. So the fact that we lack this encouragement of blue sky thinking, of really truly innovative, and that requires a lot of risk taking, that neither public nor private institutions are apparently ready to take. And but you sometimes need to have that, sometimes need to say, leave a person in a room for 10 years and say, well, you go for it. You just develop your ideas. Nobody would do that today. You would have all types of compliances on your back and, kind of metrics. So what is this person actually doing? And you're wasting taxpayers' money or whatever, And so my point is really that there is an institutional and a structural feature of how we interact that somehow makes us probably extremely risk averse and not prone to this kind of maybe more innovative type of approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem, and in the space of education, it's especially difficult because education is a well-established sector in many countries, and driving change and innovation in that sector is not easy. Requires not just investments but the willingness to take risks. And so here, I think indeed we have to find ways to try to encourage innovation that would help to improve the education sector. At the Institute for the Future Education, we're looking at this in a few different ways. We are creating platforms for interdisciplinary research based on a number of grand challenges that we see in the education space. And these grand challenges have to be addressed through a multidisciplinary approach. It's not just in the education field, but it also involves psychology, it involves business, it involves public policy to be able to drive some of these innovation and technology as well. So we're creating these interdisciplinary research groups to tackle these problems. And we're also creating platforms to communicate the learning points from our transformation journey. We're studying the what we call the Tech 21 model. This is the model of transforming to competency-based, challenge-based learning, documenting down some of those learning points and sharing those in the form of case studies so that it could help to inform policy making and also the global thinking about how future education should shape up. And finally, I think we're also creating platforms with industry to try out different types of innovation. Not just so this is not just industry in terms of the regular industry sectors, but specifically we support a number of edtech companies through our incubator, through our living lab, to do small experiments and to find ways to amplify those successes and share those as examples to the rest of the world. So the research approach that we're taking, we're avoiding the journal publishing only pathway. We're widening the types of research outputs that we have to be able to make impact in the areas that we have defined to improve the education system design and hopefully use that to impact the lives of people out there.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. It makes me think about, our ability to trust in innovation, or to trust in people who take time to innovate, and at the same time to as well accept that we don't always find solutions in a fast manner. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to arrive to solutions, and I feel like, in particular now we are so used to move fast and to come up fast with a plan how we would like to tackle a given challenge. But it seems that sometimes a short period is not enough, and we need to accept that that particular research will take 10 years, and maybe in 10 years there's still not an answer. And to basically accept that as a nation, as a society, it's an extremely difficult task to do. But definitely I'm d'accord with you to think about education as a cornerstone in that endeavor um, to think out of the box and to try to come up with solutions that have nothing to do how we used to tackle certain challenges.
Yes,
We
and
kind of arrived. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I think that that's a great point, Marianne. That traditional academic research, especially in new areas, by the time it actually has impact on the real world, it takes a long time. And when we think about the needs of our education and training system, it's today, it's tomorrow, it's not 10 years time. So the question that I think we should be thinking about as we think about research, applying research in the education space, can we take some of that great research has happened before and look at what interventions are we able to design
Mhm.
today, tomorrow, in a month's time, in 6 months' time, right, in years' time, not 10 years, because by then, as they say, the battle is lost. Uh, so I'll give you a specific example. There is research going into the space of cognitive neuroscience, extremely fascinating research, very fundamental work. Can we take that, mash that up with AI and data techniques, and start applying that in the space of learning analytics and design learning systems that is more effective in how learners think in their heads, right? And apply that knowledge. And I think that application of research would be very powerful and would have the ability to make impact within a short to medium term. So that's also some of the kind of focus areas as I think about the work for the Institute for the Future Education.
So we're gonna watch out for the papers that are coming out in the next little while to see what your colleagues and you have been working on. Um, I think we are coming to an end of our conversation. But before we do so, I just wanted to check, is there any aspect that you feel like, okay, you need to share with our listeners before we conclude?
Sure. So if you could give me a few minutes, I'll just talk a little bit about the Institute for the Future Education and how we are looking towards our contribution towards this space in the years ahead. So as we think about the future education, we think it needs to be fair, right? And fair is an acronym. We all know that education has been regarded as a great equalizer, because if you have access to education, you can move up in terms of your socioeconomic status and towards human flourishing. So we believe that future education needs to be fair, and fair stands for fit for purpose, accessible, inclusive, and responsive. Right? And we've talked a lot about fit for purpose today. How do we use technology? How do we use learning analytics to make learning even more effective, and new pedagogical methods to make learning effective for different segments of population? Accessible, because the way that we've been thinking about education in the past has been front loaded. We need to make it much more lifelong learning. The Netflix episodes. Netflix is accessible anywhere. It's easy to use. It's convenient, and that's why it is popular. So we need to make education accessible. And also, quite importantly, and we've touched on that earlier in our conversation, is that education needs to be inclusive. As we keep moving up in terms of the types of skills and competencies in the education system, we need to scale it to much wider communities, especially marginalized communities. We need to make sure that it's inclusive. And the final one is it needs to be responsive. With skills obsolescence becoming more and more frequent, how do we ensure that the education system responds in an agile manner to changes in skills needs by the industry, by society? And we need to design our education and training systems so that it is flexible and agile and responsive to the needs of our economies and society. So I would welcome uh, thought leaders, fellow practitioners, institutions, policymakers who are interested in solving these grand challenges using our FAIR approach to collaborate and work with us so that we can make this world a better place through education and training.
Thank you. I think all is said. That's a great last statement. And we are happy and very delighted that we had the chance to have a chat with you, Michael. And I hope that our conversation does not end here, but we will continue to exchange and build together innovation solutions that will, as we say, help to bring the right changes, and as well as the Agenda 2030 suggests that we are not leaving anyone behind, as we also think about inclusiveness at a greater scale. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Max. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eckhard. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Michael, very much indeed.
Thanks for the great conversation.